McDougal.
And he is in for a Jets touchdown. That's over the middle in the air, picked off. Brian Poole to the end zone, touchdown. There goes Darnold. And Bell! He's doing it all for the Jets.
And welcome back to another episode of the Cool Your Jets podcast. We're your hosts, Ben Blessington and Michael Nania. The New York Jets are 15 days away from their Week 1 game against the Buffalo Bills, and that just seems crazy to think about. It does not feel like we're that close to football. Before we hop into the podcast, Michael, how you doing, man?
I'm doing good. Like you said, only 15 days away and, less than that to the actual season opener with Houston and Kansas City. It's going to be so good to have football back. And, the fact that yesterday, today when we're recording this, but August 28th was supposed to be the third preseason game against Pittsburgh. We should have so many reps in with all these rookies and these new additions, so many hot takes based on who's playing well, who's not playing well. But we're still stuck with going off of the tweets here in late August into early September. So I'm excited to see some real football in it. And it's going to be so wild, the fact that the season opener is going to be the first time we see so many of these players in a Jets uniform. So it's going to be really wild, but exciting at the same time to see all this coming together at once.
Yeah, I do believe the Jets have a scrimmage on Sunday at MetLife Stadium, so that'll be a little bit more official than the training camp scrimmages and regular practices that we've had up until this point. But you're right. I mean, Week 1 against Buffalo, it's going to be a completely different feeling than years past. All the new faces, trying to watch the young players and the offensive line gel. It's going to be a challenge for the Jets. And why don't we hop into that first? Because it's probably my biggest concern about the Jets is they're pretty banged up right now. And look, there are a few big players that are still yet to practice. Denzel Mims, Avery Williamson, Pierre Desir. I mean, Brian Poole, I think he may have had practice the first practice. Perriman hasn't practiced in a week, but I think he's supposed to practice by the time you're listening to this. So just quite a few starters that have yet to hit the practice field or have only seen it in limited action. And we're supposed to be playing football in 15 days actually. So Michael, how worried are you, would you say, for Week 1 in Buffalo, just considering the lack of reps for a lot of key players for this Jets team?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a legitimate concern. It already is for teams like the Jets that have had so much turnover, a lot of new faces. Those teams, they were already going to be at a disadvantage considering how much gelling they have to do in such a short amount of time with no preseason reps. So it was already going to be tough for them. And the fact that a lot of the key players that they need out there have been banged up, especially at receiver. You mentioned a couple of the corners with Poole and Desir. A lot of key injuries at important spots where the Jets are, again, have a lot of turnover, are trying to acclimate some new faces. So it's definitely a question mark, I think. But at the same time, most of the teams in the league are facing similar questions. But the teams that aren't, the teams that are staying very healthy, the teams that do have a lot of continuity, like the team they're facing in Week 1, the Bills, who do have a lot of returning players. They did add Stephon Diggs, but most of their offensive line is back. Most of their defense is back. So teams like them, and if they can stay healthy, can have a real advantage this season, considering what everyone has been having to deal with. But at the same time, there aren't too many teams like that. This is the NFL. There's a lot of change year over year with most teams. So most of the league is going through the same things that the Jets are. So it's definitely a problem, but at the same time, I'm not sure how much of a disadvantage it is compared to everyone else because, again, a lot of teams are going through the same issues right now. But against this Bills team, I think this is one of the few teams in the league that do have a lot of continuity, so they could feel a lot more comfortable with the disadvantages of this offseason, the lost time. So going to Week 1, it could be a pretty big issue. But throughout the season, I think everyone's going through this across the league. So it's just going to come down to depth, and that's the biggest thing with Joe Douglas and his building of this team, what he's tried to do this offseason and what he'll have to do every year going forward as he tries to make this team a contender is build that depth. So when guys get hurt, because it happens every year all the time, can't avoid injuries, you have a second, third string player that can come in and do a pretty good job and, not lose your footing when your starters go down, like the Jets did in the beginning of last season when they were completely incompetent when their starters left the lineup. So we're going to really see a lot about some of the depth moves that Joe Douglas has made, We're going to see some players who we didn't expect to see too much of, like Chris Hogan at receiver. Even Braxton Berrios could play quite a bit in the beginning. Maybe Lawrence Cager even somehow gets into that lineup. At cornerback, Bless Austin could have a lot on his plate if Pierre Desir can't go. At slot corner, the Jets could have some problems there if Poole isn't good, although most of these players should be back by then. But,
right.
We're going to see a lot. The depth is going to be tested pretty quickly.
Right. And, up until this point, the Jets haven't really faced any that I can think of off the top of my head, season-ending injuries, knock on wood. It's been mostly injuries like Mims where it's soft tissue or something that's going to keep him week to week. But every player that we've listed is expected to be back by week 1. I am worried about Mims just because it's 16 days. He hasn't practiced at all. No rookie minicamp, no OTAs. He's supposed to be a starter. So it's hard to imagine that he'll be effective even if he does play, even if he is a starter. I do think that Mims is going to have a really strong second half of the season. Otto Beckham Jr., not to make any comparisons, had a very similar first training camp with the Giants. He had a hamstring injury. He was out for an extended period of time. He tried to come back too soon. He re-aggravated it, and he didn't make his debut until a few weeks later on in the season. And when he came in, he was amazing. I mean, so hopefully the Jets can get something similar like that with Denzel Mims. He doesn't need to be Otto Beckham Jr., but I do think when he does come back and when he's had a few weeks to get acclimated to the offense, I think he's going to have a big impact on this team. But certainly the first few weeks of the season, you can't expect much from him. And a lot of those other guys are veterans. I don't think Perriman will have any issues considering he's practiced a good amount of time. And Poole is returning. Williamson was with the team last year, although it has been a year since he's even played football. So you'd like to get him on the field, but inside linebacker is a position the Jets are fairly okay at. And, Pierre Desir is a guy who hasn't played at all, also with a hamstring, but he is a vet in this league. So, look, I mean, it's certainly an excuse the Jets can use early on in their season, but it is something they can't overcome. I'm glad that they are having a returning coaching staff this year. I couldn't imagine doing this whole offseason with a new coach. That's a benefit as much as people don't love Adam Gase. I am glad that he's returning for that reason alone. Just we don't have to worry about Sam learning a new system. We don't have to worry about although there's a lot of turnover, we don't have to worry about, the organization trying to get behind a new coach or anything. This is the second year. There's some continuity there for the team.
Yeah, that's a good point. And that is something that most of the league does have a returning coach, but the teams that are bringing in a new coach, those are the teams that are going to have pretty major problems. I think, it's already hard enough to do that, to acclimate a new system, just a new culture, everything that comes with bringing in a new coach. And then to do that this offseason in which you've lost so much practice time, and the first official game you play is going to be the first actual real game you play against another opponent. Those are the teams that could have problems. So that is a nice plus for the Jets compared to some other teams across the league to have Gase coming back.
Yeah, and a little off topic, but you reminded me of it when you were talking about the Jets' lack of depth. And you talked about Joe Douglas worked on it this offseason, and I think the Jets are a deeper team than they were last year, but they still lack the depth that you'll see in a lot of the top contenders around the league, like Baltimore, like San Francisco or KC. And that obviously comes with good drafting. And we've talked about it, might have been months ago on a podcast, talking about building the pipeline through a draft at a position where you have a veteran who plays, you draft a guy in the third or fourth round, and the veteran, after maybe let the veteran walk in a year or two, and that rookie can come in and play while providing depth for the first 2 years of his career. The Jets have really lacked that for the past maybe decade. But that's something that I expect to improve with Douglas. Obviously the top end drafting and hitting on consistently on more picks is what I expect from Douglas and competent GMing. But the biggest thing I think you're going to see with him as a GM is the improved depth through those day 2 and day 3 picks, because that's where they come, and that's where the Jets have really struggled. Not to mention next offseason, if Jets fans want to get excited for something beyond 2020, the Jets, after making a few cuts, should have top 3 in cap space, and it's an offseason where I expect the free agent pool to be one of the deepest it's ever been, if not the deepest, just because so many teams are going to have to cut established players, veteran players, good players to try to get under that cap space. The Jets are going to have a lot of cap, 2 first-round draft picks. So I think next year is when you'll see the Jets really improve that depth. But I agree with you. This year they have better depth, but it's certainly going to be tested early on. Another move that the Jets made, trading for Kalen Ballage, a conditional late-round pick. I don't really get the hate on this. I mean, look, is it like an amazing move by any means? No. But teams, people on Twitter, are generally most of the people you encounter on Twitter are ill-informed, to say the least. But like, I don't really think that trading Kalen Ballage is a season ender for the Jets, and that means that Adam Gase is not going to use Le'Veon Bell, and that they're incompetent. And only I saw that, I think it was Adam Rank had the tweet that Adam Gase pays for free samples at Costco or something because the Dolphins were supposedly going to cut Kalen Ballage. But you'll see teams do this. Where if a player is going to get cut and they don't have a position on the waiver wire where they think they can get him, they'll just trade a conditional late-round pick. If he makes the team, and we don't even know what the conditions are. The conditions might not just be that he makes a team. The conditions could be that he plays X number of games or X number of snaps or whatever. But I'd imagine it's conditional 7th, probably the bare minimum. And it's just, it's a player that Adam Gase pretty much drafted, was solid from his rookie year in 2018. He probably likes him, fits the system, and they wanted to get him. So, and if it doesn't work out, they'll cut him. So I don't really feel like this is, and recoup that pick. So I don't really feel like this was something to overreact to. Yes, running back as a position the Jets are fairly deep at, and they need more help at receiver. But I think those two things are completely separate issues, especially with Josh Adams going down in training camp. I think this is a guy that they add to be the 4th running back. We'll see if he makes the team. But if not, I wouldn't be too concerned. Michael, what were your thoughts when you saw the Kalen Ballage trade? I know you were also a little confused, but like me, we're not, over the moon angry, like I saw a lot of people on Jets Twitter were.
Yeah, like you said, it's reacting to this move at all is just, whether it's positive or negative, I think is an overreaction because, like you said, they're probably trading a conditional 7th round pick if he plays a few games or, whatever the conditions are. They'd only be giving up a 7th round pick, which is basically nothing when you look at the history of what 7th round picks do. And again, they'd only be giving it up if he plays a few games, which he probably won't even make the roster. And if he does, he's probably going to be inactive for most games. So there's just nothing to react to here. It's basically the same as if they did pick him up off waivers and just add him to have another body in practice every single day. So it doesn't mean that they're going to trade Le'Veon Bell. It doesn't mean that Bell isn't going to get as many touches. It means absolutely nothing. So reacting to it at all, I think, is a little bit of an overreaction. It's just Gase seeing a player who, was there with him in Miami, who he probably likes quite a bit, and trades a conditional, probably 7th round pick to get him on the roster. And, if he plays and you give up a 7th to get him, that's fine. You're not really losing much of anything. And if not, you're not losing anything at all. So I don't think it's anything worth overreacting to. But also on the other side, I don't think there's a ton of upside either because he just hasn't been a very good player, to say the least, his first few years. I mean, he hasn't really touched the ball much, but he's only averaged 3 yards per carry over his first 2 years, and that's even with almost a quarter of his yards coming on one run. So he hasn't done too much yet, so I'm not sure there's a lot of upside with Ballage, but at the same time, there's absolutely nothing to complain about. They basically picked him up off waivers, and if he plays, you give up a worthless pick. So there's nothing to react to.
Yeah, without this is pure speculation without really knowing about the conditions of the contract. But I think you're right. It's going to be games activated. And this is a creative way. If it's a player you like, but you don't think you're going to get him on waivers, this is a way to get him on your team in a creative way that probably won't cost your team anything. And if it does, it'll be minimally. I guarantee you it's probably something like he has to be activated for, let's say just around
like maybe 8 games.
Right, exactly. Yeah. 8 games. And then what the Jets are going to do is they'll probably just have him inactive. And then if a running back goes down, they'll activate him. But they'll be pretty careful to try to not get him to 8 games. And if for some reason he's balling out or the Jets have a huge rash of injuries at running back and he's activated for more than 8 games, then you give up a 7th. But at that point, that's a player that you really like. If he's bad, they'll just cut him and sign somebody else. But this is a way that you can get a player that you like and cut the waiver wire line. I really don't hate this move. Look, you could complain about Kalen Ballage as a player, but the move in itself, I really didn't see. I feel like they got a lot of undeserving criticism, and then the people who really didn't understand, thinking that the Jets were just trading for a player that was going to be released anyways. It's a little bit more complicated than that. So from a GMing standpoint, I actually like it. From Kalen Ballage as a player, I don't really think he's going to do much, but, a young player that Gase liked. I agree with you, Michael. I think any reaction is an overreaction to this. The main point of this podcast, though, we wanted to make one prediction for every rookie. on the team, or I guess every draft pick, and then we have one undrafted free agent you can choose and make a prediction on them. Just one 2020 season prediction. It can be about their stats, some, just their overline story of their season, the position group, just something relating to that player. So I'll start, I guess, with Mckay Bechten. And yeah, I think that Mckay Bechten is going to be the Jets' best rookie offensive player. I think that he's going to establish himself as Sam Darnold's left tackle. I'm trying to make maybe more of a concrete prediction statistically, but I think that my main prediction with Makai Bechten is that he's going to hit as a pick. I know he was a bit of a boomer bust pick in some people's minds, but I think after year one, we're going to be very happy with Makai Bechten's season, particularly in the run blocking game, and I think you're going to see him take strides in the pass blocking game as well. I think after 16 games are complete, I think people are going to look back and commend Joe Douglas for that pick. Michael, if you had to make one prediction for Mckay Bechten's season, what would it be?
Yeah, I think the way you laid it out is pretty good. I think when we come out of this season, we're going to feel good about him being the left tackle of the future. That doesn't mean he'll dominate this season, but when we come out of this year, we're going to be like, okay, he's the answer. We know that he's locked in for the duration of his rookie contract. He's going to start there, and hopefully he can improve to a superstar level going forward. But as for this season, I think he'll be very good in the run game, not quite to the ceiling of his potential yet. And in the passing game, I think we'll see. I think there will be games here and there. Like the Jets play some really good rushers this season. Nick Bosa, Joey Bosa, Von Miller. So there are some really good players on the schedule. I think he'll have some rough games in protection. But at the same time, I think when they go against lesser rushers, easier defenses, I think he'll clean up against those teams. So I think he'll be up and down in the passing game. But in the run game, I think he'll be mostly very good. And then long term, his potential in both phases is pretty much limitless. So hopefully he can fulfill that. But as for this season, I think he'll probably be okay in the passing game and really good in the run game to be a solid starter overall.
Yeah, I think the big key there for Makai Bechten is I don't think he's going to be a turnstile. I don't think it's going to be something where after 16 games we're like, well, the Jets has drafted a bust. I think you're right. I think he's going to have some games where he might struggle in pass protection, but I think as the season goes on, you're going to see him really improve. I think he's going to do well, like you said, against teams that don't have elite pass rushers, and I think he's going to perform very well in the run game. Yeah, next, second-round rookie Denzel Mims, who hasn't practiced 15 days until the season opener. Yeah, I guess my prediction for him is that I think he will struggle at the beginning of the season. I think you're going to see him have reps taken away by Chris Hogan. He might not start the first few games. I think he may even be receiver number 4 to open up things. But I think that second half of the season, I think he's really going to go on a tear. And I think, I don't want to make the OBJ comparisons, but when you talk about a guy who missed a lot of time in training camp with the hamstring and then is either injured or not doing much at the beginning parts of the season and then coming in and giving that team a big boost right around the bye week is I think when you're going to see Denzel Mims really take off. As far as a statistical prediction on him, I would say that I think he's going to have a similar season to maybe a smaller sample size, but a guy like DK Metcalf, I think you could see him having a similar boom, I guess, for the Jets offense, like DK on a smaller sample size. DK, I think, had like 7 touchdowns. I think you're going to see Denzel put up around 5 to 7 touchdowns this year, but they're all, for the most part, going to come in the second half of the season. Michael, if you had to make a prediction on Denzel Mims's rookie season, what would it be?
Yeah, I like what you said about the Beckham comparison because obviously we're not saying he's going to put up Odell numbers, but in terms of the arc of Odell's 2014 season, suffering an injury in the offseason, missing some time, and then coming back and playing well, I can definitely see that happening for Mims. And I'm kind of in the same boat as you. I think he's going to trend upward throughout the season. And a guy who I compare him to statistically for his rookie season is Chris Godwin. He was also, he's a 3rd-round pick. So like Mims, a day 2 selection. And in his rookie season, Godwin had 34 catches, 525 yards. On only 55 targets. So I think that's what's important for me with Mims is that he's efficient on a per target basis, per route basis, because the playing time, he might not get a lot depending on how much confidence the coaching staff has in him if he stays healthy. So he might not get a lot of playing time, but if he can make the most out of his opportunities, that's how you can see the upside that in the future, once he does get more acclimated, stay healthy, just acclimates into the league a little bit more, then he can become a superstar. And that's what Chris Godwin did. Didn't put up the biggest numbers as a rookie, but he was really efficient. And then the next 2 years, Godwin put up much bigger numbers in terms of volume because he got more opportunities and he maintained that efficiency. So I'm hoping that's what Mims does. I'm not expecting him to put up a ton of catches or yards or touchdowns, but if he can be an efficient producer, give the Jets big plays when they do go his way, I think that's what's most important. So I think Mims will probably put up somewhere from 500 to 600 yards, 4 or 5 touchdowns. But the biggest key is if he can do that efficiently on a number of targets to where he's making big plays on a consistent basis when the ball is thrown his way. So that's probably where I'd go for him. He's not going to be a big part of the offense this year, but if he can show flashes of that elite ability, then he can set himself up to break out next year.
Right. I agree with you that I don't think he's going to be a big part of the offense at the beginning of the year, but I do think that the second half, I think when you're getting to weeks 14, 15, and 16 and 17, I think you're going to see Denzel Mims as the number 1 or number 2 option on every play. I think it's going to take him some time to develop that chemistry with Sam Darnold, but I think once that happens, you're going to see him up there with I think his skill set is really meshes well with Sam Darnold's skill set. So I think you're going to see him have a similar type of rapport that Chris Herndon has with Sam Darnold. Even now, Jamison Crowder has a little bit out of the slot. Different positions, but I think that his physicality, his ability to win jump balls, I think when Sam has to break the pocket and the play breaks down, he can throw it to a guy like Denzel Mims, who may have a corner on him, but he's elite, or at least he was elite in college, in the red zone and at going up and getting contested jump balls. So I think the Denzel Mims, the second half of that season, is really going to take that big jump for the Jets offense and establish that rapport with Sam Darnold. Next, third-round rookie Ashton Davis, who's been lighting it up in training camp. I will say he's got some rave reviews. I know you were a little skeptical on him having a good rookie season. And again, these are just training camp practices. He may still be burnt toast for 16 games this year, but it sounds like he's doing all right. Displaying that athleticism. Greg Williams using a lot of 3 safety looks. My prediction for Davis, I actually think he's going to have a really good year. I'm going to say, when you're looking at interceptions, forced fumbles, and fumbles recovered, I think Ashton Davis is going to have 5 total turnovers his rookie season, which would be pretty great. I think it'll be probably around 2 or 3 interceptions and then 2 or 3 forced fumbles or fumble recoveries. I think that he's just brings lots of this Jets defense in terms of athleticism. And look, that doesn't necessarily mean anything for his rookie year. I think Marcus Williams had 6 interceptions in 2015, and look what he's doing this year. But I do think that Ashton Davis will provide the Jets a bit through his athleticism. I think he'll just be able to display some turnover abilities for this defense, which is something they lacked a little bit last year. But Michael, if you had to make a prediction for Ashton Davis, what would you say?
Yeah, I'm going to temper my expectations with Davis a little bit. I think that May and McDougald will mostly handle the safety position. Davis will definitely get his snaps. I think you'll see him probably play somewhere from 20 to 30%, assuming everyone's healthy, probably somewhere around there in terms of snaps, maybe around a quarter of the defensive snaps come in, in nickel and dime situations, maybe in the slot sometimes, to other times could play in the box, cover tight ends. There are a lot of different things he can do. So I think he'll play a decent amount of time as that third safety. More so than just being a backup, but also being used in certain situations. So I think he'll get some playing time. I don't think he's going to put up anything unique in terms of numbers this season, interceptions, fumbles, things like that. Maybe he gets one here or there. So I'm not expecting too much from him production-wise. Hopefully in coverage, he can just be efficient there, not give up any big plays down the field, not miss too many tackles. And that would be okay for now. And then hopefully down the line, McDougald's a free agent after this year, so hopefully he can show you the promise, especially as a deep safety, to where you can trust him to fit next to Marcus May long-term as the 2 safeties of the future. But in terms of production, I don't expect too much from him. But on special teams, I could see him maybe being one of the leaders in tackles, in coverage. I could definitely see that, maybe getting 7 or 8 tackles on the season in punt kickoff coverage. But on defense, I think he'll get a decent amount of snaps, not too much, won't produce a ton, but hopefully he can keep the missed tackles down and cover efficiently, especially not giving up too many big plays down the field.
Yeah, and look, those turnovers count on special teams as well if he gets a forced fumble or a fumble recovery. And I agree with you. I think he's going to have some rookie struggles, particularly in coverage, and he might make some mental errors. But I think through his athleticism alone, I think he's going to put himself in the right place at the right time a few points this season. And I think he'll display that long-term potential that he could be a starter for the Jets. But I agree with you. I think his value immediately for this team is going to be on special teams. Next to Barzaniga, who I don't believe he's practiced either with a quad injury, but he's not projected to be a starter. He's a guy that's intriguing because when he was healthy at Florida, he did display some very promising numbers. He kind of reminds me of a Brandon Graham type of player, not necessarily going to be a huge force off the edge, but he's a guy that's very versatile, can line him up at defensive tackle, can put his hand in the dirt, can stand him up. He's going to be great against the run, and he's going to get some pressures and cleanup sacks as well. I think my prediction for Zuniga, though, this year, I think it's going to be a quiet year for him. He may have a few plays at the end of the season, a sack or two, but I think he's probably going to be injured the first few weeks, given that we haven't heard literally anything about him. So he may struggle with injuries, but I think he's a guy that when you look towards 2021's training camp, he's a guy that I think you could see make a lot of noise or maybe work his way into the starting lineup or something. But I think this year it's going to be fairly quiet. He may flash a few times. That gives you hope for 2021, but I don't expect a big year from Jabari Zuniga. It'd be great if the Jets could get it out of him, considering they have literally nobody that can really win one-on-ones and get a lot of sacks for their defense. But I don't really think that's who Jabari Zuniga is going to be, especially in his rookie year.
Yeah, I agree with you. I don't see too much from him. I like the Brandon Graham comparison. Graham for the Eagles, he can play in the edge. He can kick inside, play some three tech. And he's always been a quiet, really good player. Doesn't put up a ton of sacks, but he gets a lot of pressure for them. And I could see Zuniga being that player long-term down the line, especially once there's some more room on the interior, because I think that will kind of be Zuniga's game. He's not just going to play defensive end. I think will be playing a lot inside as well. And right now, the Jets do have a lot of traffic on that interior with how good they are. But I don't think he's going to play a ton this year. Also, especially because their edge guys right now are outside linebackers, and that's kind of how Greg wants to use them. Jenkins and Basham, they drop into coverage pretty frequently for their position, and I don't think that's something that he can do. So for now, as a rookie, I don't see him playing much or producing much, but down the line, as some of those spots on the defensive line open and his versatility can shine a little bit more, then I could see him becoming a really good dirty working player, both on the inside and on the edge, but not expecting much of anything from him this year.
Yeah. Looking towards the fourth round rookies, P Rein is a guy who I'm intrigued with as well. I know you necessarily weren't too high on him, Michael, but I think he's had a few good training camp practices, and we talked about it a few episodes ago where he's a guy that Joe Douglas took, very high ceiling player. You're going to get him in the locker room, and he's going to be a guy that might be a Jet for 5 to 8 years. He may not be a superstar running back, but I think he's a guy that's always going to be part of the backfield rotation. And that's kind of how I feel for him this year. I think he's going to be quiet at the beginning of the season. I think it's going to be the Le'Veon Bell and Frank Gore show as the season goes on. Similar to a guy like Denzel Mims, I think he's going to get a lot more carries, whether it's through injuries or just through fresh legs. But I think by the end of the season, he's going to establish himself as a guy who, if he's not, the presumed starter in 2021, I think he's going to at least be the presumed key figure of the backfield. I think if Gase is returning, he likes more of a running back by committee approach. Barring a massive season by Le'Veon Bell, I think they're probably going to release Le'Veon Bell after the season. Frank Gore, I would assume, is not going to be back. And so I think going into 2021 after P Rein season, where I think he's going to have a relatively strong second half, I think you're going to look at him as a guy who is going to be a key part of that rotation. You're going to bring him in and then maybe draft somebody else to pair with him or sign somebody else to pair with him. But I think the big point is that P Rein's second half of the season is going to establish himself as a guy who's going to get a lot more touches in 2021. Michael, what's your prediction for Michael P Rein?
Yeah, I think to start out, Gore is definitely going to be pretty involved. He'll take on sort of the Powell role from last year, spelling Bell, mostly in short yardage situations, some first downs. But I think it's going to be shared mostly between Bell and Gore early on with not too much P Rein. But as the season goes on, P Rein should definitely get some opportunities later in the season. And a guy who I think is a good comparison for him, who actually I actually backed up the same exact player that P Rein is this season, James Conner, with the Steelers in 2017. Only had 32 carries for 144 yards throughout the season, but they were an efficient 32 carries, 4.5 yards per attempt. And that's even without a really long run pushing up his numbers. He was pretty solid in his limited opportunities with the Steelers. Then the next season, Bell sits that one out because of the contract issues with Pittsburgh. Conner takes on the starting role, and he plays really well for the Steelers with 12 touchdowns and 75 yards a game. So do I think P Rein's going to put up that big of numbers as a starter with the Jets in the future? Probably not, but I could definitely see with Bell maybe leaving next season if the Jets decide to part with him. Obviously, Gore's probably not going to be around. I could definitely see P Rein taking over as the starter next year. But I think the biggest thing with P Rein is that he's a player who does a lot of things at a solid level. He might not have superstar potential, but he's a good blocker. He's got really soft hands, does not drop the ball a lot, very rarely fumbles the ball. And there's just a lot of things. He also, as a receiver, he had 5 touchdowns for the Gators last season, which I believe was way up there among running backs. It might have been second most. So he can do a lot of different things at a solid level. And that's the type of player who you can have in your offense for a long time and can help you in a lot of different ways. So I think the biggest thing with P Rein this season is when he's out there, can he block at an efficient level? Can he keep the drops down, keep the fumbles down, and also contribute in the passing game? So that's what I think is most important for him. He's going to get some snaps here and there, sort of like Ty Montgomery last season was that third running back with occasional snaps, especially in the passing game. So that's what I want to see from P Rein, good blocking and production in the receiving game.
Right, and the next rookie, James Morgan, and I think it's pretty obvious this year is going to be a James Morgan redshirt season, and if it's not, something's most likely gone drastically wrong with this season. As far as a prediction, I think he's going to be on the practice squad the entire season. I think even if Joe Flacco can't play, it sounds like they might even have Mike White be the immediate backup. I think he's going to be on that practice squad, but the protected practice squad, so nobody's going to steal him. He's certainly a guy who should be the backup in 2021. But at this point in his career, he's just redshirting. He was a very raw prospect coming out, had a high ceiling, but he's a guy that needs some development. So I don't expect him to be activated for any 16 games. That would be my prediction. Michael, how about you for James Morgan?
Yeah, I think Sam Darnold's probably going to miss the first game and the whole entire season, and Morgan will play every game. I could see 28 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. If James Morgan plays a single down, something has probably gone completely wrong. Unless he's just handing the ball off at the end of the fourth quarter, Jets are up 38-0 on Kansas City, then I'd be okay with him playing. But let's be honest, if he plays, most likely something's gone wrong. So I agree, too. I think he will spend most of the season inactive with Mike White starting off as a backup and Flacco taking his place once he's healthy. But Morgan is very interesting long-term. It was an interesting pick, to say the least, considering that fact that, it was a little early to take a quarterback project, considering that, usually you want your backup quarterback to be a veteran who can just slide right in, understand the playbook, get the ball where it needs to be, and run the offense efficiently. And a rookie quarterback or a young quarterback that you have to develop, it's tough to really ease a young quarterback into a backup role, considering that he's got to play to get the experience he needs to be a reliable backup in the first place. So I'm not huge on the idea of drafting and developing backup quarterbacks. I was not a big fan of the pick, so it will be interesting to see how that one plays out over the next few years. If he does end up playing too much, just like this year, something probably didn't go well with Sam Darnold. So I was not a fan of that pick, still really am not, especially with Mike White playing so well, although that's kind of a hindsighted thing. But I don't think Morgan will play this year, but it will be interesting to see if the Jets how they could possibly look back on this pick as a win.
Yeah, I think the one thing that I take away from the Morgan pick, I agree with you. It's a bit of a head scratcher. It just means to me that Joe Douglas must have really liked him, and I think he recognizes that the quarterback is the most valuable position. And if you have a guy that, it was rumored to be the Patriots' apple of their eye, if you liked him and you take him in the fourth round, you develop him, maybe you can flip him for some picks or have a long-term backup or potentially a starter if something goes drastically wrong. But yeah, I agree with you. I mean, you could also look at it as potentially the Jets felt like they were playing a little bit with house money, considering they had 3 4th-round picks. They weren't supposed to. It's because they traded down, and it was like, well, we like this kid. Now we can take him, and we still, can take the next guy on our list, Cameron Clark, a few slots later. So I agree with you. It was a bit of a head scratcher, but I'm not going to completely criticize the pick yet without him playing a few years and just seeing exactly what does he turn out to be. But certainly the most head-scratching move of Joe Douglas's tenure so far. Cameron Clark, who's a guy very high upside in my mind. I'm very high in Cameron Clark. I don't think he's going to be a guy that is going to play much this year. But when you look at his tape against Clemson, very promising. He certainly has a future at interior offensive line in this league. Was Joe Douglas's only other offensive lineman outside of Mckay Bechten that he drafted. It sounds like he was very high on him, but it doesn't sound like Cameron Clark will play that much, at least early in the season. The 2 guards right now, the 2 guys that are ahead of him, Alex Lewis and Greg Van Roten, are both more stopgap solutions, whereas Makai Bechten and Connor McGovern are long-term guys, and George Fant / Chuma Adoga are guys that could potentially be long-term guys, but right now are just question marks. But the guys at guard, those are guys who are probably only going to be here for 1 year, maybe 2 years. So he has an opportunity to leapfrog him if he's really impressive, but considering, where he's coming from in college, I don't expect much of an impact at all from him. He may be a guy who plays weeks 15, 16, and 17 a little bit and can come in and hopefully he impresses. But I've been pretty high on a lot of these rookies, and I feel like I have to balance it out because, it's impossible to hit on every single draft pick. And that's not to say I don't think Cameron Clark will be good. I'm just saying my expectations for him this year are fairly low. I think he's more of a guy who may flash in 2021, similar to what I said about Barzaniga. I don't think he's going to do much this year. I think it's more about 2021 for Cameron Clark and seeing what he can do with a full offseason, the full OTAs, training camp, get him in there and see if he can steal one of those guard spots, maybe compete for a spot in 2021 as well. Michael, what are your thoughts on Cameron Clark?
Yeah, you really have been pretty optimistic. If everything goes the way that you've laid it out, the Jets should be in really good shape going forward. But
I'm a big believer in Joe Douglas. I don't know what to say.
I am too. But this guy is a part of the reason that I'm pretty high in Joe Douglas. I like this pick quite a bit. I think they got a guy with legitimate starting upside in Clark down there in the 4th round. So like you said, not going to start right away. But I do think that he will be if there are injuries at the guard spots, which most likely there will be between Lewis and Van Roten. I think he will get some playing time there at some point due to injury. So I think we'll get a good look at him at some point this season. The first backup at guard, I'm assuming, would be Josh Andrews. And then if they need another replacement, they would go to Clark second. But I think we'll get a look at him at some point this season. You shouldn't expect anything out of a 4th-round rookie from Charlotte. But I think that at some point, next year, I think he will compete, win a starting guard spot, and establish himself as a solid starter going forward. Those are high hopes, definitely. But I like what I saw from his tape, especially against Clemson. Sam Cernick had a really good article of Clark's film in that game at JetX, so definitely check that out. But I like Clark a lot. I think his nastiness next to Bechten, that can be a really good left side duo for the next few years. So I don't expect anything this season. I do think he'll play at some point, but he'll probably struggle. But next season, I think he will win that one of those starting guard spots, hopefully the left side, just because aesthetically thinking about him and Bechten next to each other is really exciting.
Yeah, I agree. I think the hope for him, again, is to compete for one of those guard spots in 2021, but a quiet 2020 is most likely what I expect. Similar situation with Bryce Hall, a little bit different. I mean, he was a guy that really fell in the draft that some people thought could go in the 3rd round, and he fell all the way to the Jets in the 5th, I believe. Michael, I guess I've gone first on literally all of these, but I guess I can throw you the last 3 between Clark, Mann, and an undrafted free agent. But we'll start, Hall, Mann, and an undrafted free agent. We'll start with Bryce Hall. What's a prediction you have for his 2020 season? Another guy who was drafted but not really expected to have a huge 2020. But look at that cornerback position. You look at some of the injuries they've had there. Hall was just recently activated a few days ago off the reserve COVID list. So, and I know he's still rehabbing from his injury, but he should be a guy that should be able to practice in a few weeks. Do you have any predictions on Bryce Hall's 2020 season? Do you think he makes an impact? Just your overall thoughts.
Well, I think the obvious optimistic kind of outline is what Bless Austin did last season, missing all of the offseason, taking his time to heal from a previous injury, and then coming in and playing really well. That's obviously the optimistic path. But even though Austin did it last season, and this just goes to how impressive it is what Austin did for them last year. That is a really hard thing to do as a rookie cornerback. To play well as a rookie cornerback, period, is hard. But to do it after missing so much time in the offseason and as a later round pick that, has a harder road to earning confidence from the coaching staff and probably isn't about as good as some of the higher picks. It's an extremely hard thing to do. So it goes back to how impressive Austin's season last year was and how good he could be. But in terms of Hall, I think most likely he's not going to play a lot this year. If he takes the Bless Austin path, that'd be great. But I think the most likely scenario is that we don't see a ton of him this year. But cornerback does appear to be pretty banged up, so he could get in there at some point. But my prediction would be he only plays maybe 1 or 2 games later in the season.
Yeah, he's also a guy that I could see could be one of those head scratchers that's just never activated for a game, or maybe he's just injured the entire season. I agree with you. There is some optimism in my mind that he could, especially the second half of the season, but I know I've said that a lot for a lot of these guys, could work his way up the depth chart, maybe establish himself as that CB4, usurping Arthur Millette, getting some playing time, maybe forced to play some extended minutes in some games. But again, I think he's a guy that might have a redshirt rookie season. I like his upside, but I think he's just had too many injuries in the last year for him. And I just think that it's not necessarily that cornerback's a huge position of strength for the Jets or anything, but I do feel like between Desir and Bless and Poole that they should be all right. And Millette, they're not amazing by any stretch, but I think that they will be all right. And I think that Hall will probably be redshirting more, but it wouldn't surprise me, just like any of these guys. Obviously, these predictions aren't concrete, so I'm just trying to lean one way or the other. A lot of these guys, it could go either way on whether or not they make an impact or they don't play that much. With Hall, I'll go that he's pretty much redshirted this year. But again, you could swap him out with a guy like P Rein or Zuniga as a guy who comes on at the end of the season and does play some games where, again, I agree with you. The Bless Austin comparison is the one that immediately pops in my head because the similarities are so stark there. Greg Williams has made it work before us, but we'll see if he can make it work again. It'd be great if he could play and really establish himself as a guy who could compete for one of those starting spots like Bless Austin has done this offseason. Next, your favorite player on the entire team, Braden Mann. Michael, I'll give you your predictions. Are we going to go with anything statistically here? Or are we going to go more with the storyline? Michael, your prediction for Braden Mann.
I will throw some numbers out there. I think he's going to come in and be immediately elite. I definitely think he will, just because the Jets have such a good special teams infrastructure. Lachlan Edwards and all the people who know that I was backing him up are going to crush me now because I'm saying this, but individually, he wasn't that good. His own numbers weren't great. His hang time, some of his distance numbers, his ability to pin the other team inside the 10, a lot of individual stats, he wasn't good. But the Jets still had an elite punting DVOA the past 2 seasons because their coverage is so good, their scheme under Boyer. They've just been very consistent there. So I think they have because people forget punting is not just the punter. There's 10 other guys out there. And those guys have been playing very well the past 2 years under Boyer. So I think they have a great system in place. And then you put Mann in there. He's got very good distance. I think you're going to get that from him. When the Jets are punting from their own 20, from their own 10, he's going to be able to flip the field. I think he can do that. But the question is, can he avoid outkicking his coverage? Can he pin opponents inside the 10? And I think he can. We've seen reports of him, being really good at pinning, showing that he can do that in practice, having really good touch, pinning opponents, that he's got sort of a knuckleball spin to his punts to where he can, drop them in there and let the ball bounce without going into the end zone, have it come back towards him so they can be down. So I think he's going to be really good. I think he's definitely going to live up to the hype. And the Jets will be a top 5 team in punting DVOA once again. And for Mann himself, I think he's a guy who could definitely be up there in terms of net punting average. That stat doesn't tell you everything because it's biased towards punters on worse teams who are punting from their own territory more often because if you're on a good team and if you're punting, near the other side of the field, there aren't as many yards to be had. You still have a job to do, but you can't get as many net yards. So that isn't the best stat, but I could see Mann doing really well there because of his pure leg strength and the fact that the Jets don't have the best offense and might have a lot of punts from their own side of the field. But I could see him ranking pretty high there. But most importantly, I think punting DVOA as a team is the most important stat. And I think the Jets will be top 5 there for the, I believe, I forget what their ranking was this past season exactly, but they've been very good there past couple seasons. And I think they will be top 5 once again. I think he's going to be very good. I definitely think he will.
Yeah, I mean, so far, including what I'm about to say about Braden Mann, I mean, this would be one of the best draft classes ever, at least one of the most optimistic draft classes ever. But with Braden Mann, I agree with you. I think that their punting DVOA is going to be among the top teams in the league. But with Mann, I think my bold prediction or the type of season he'll have, I think the big thing I think about when I think about a Jets punter is an ill-timed shank. He's something where they're on their own 25. They need to pin the defense back deep, and Lack Edwards or Ryan Quigley or whoever, whichever mediocre Jets punter.
I still get nightmares about Ryan Quigley holding us back from the number 1 seed in 2015. His punts in the Patriots game, the first one they lost, and then the Bills. Well, he was hurt for that one, and then Steve Weatherford played, and he was bad. But there was, especially the last Bills game, and there was one other one where Quigley was so bad, and they lost partially because of that. And if the Jets had 2 more wins, they could have tied for the best record in the AFC that year. So Ryan Quigley is a cursed name.
Well, what I was about to say is that I think Braden Mann will have 0 ill-timed shanks. I think that's not to say he's going to have amazing punts every single of the time, but I don't think he's going to have any punts that are, under 30, 25 yards, unless he's trying to pin him for some reason that short. I think he's just going to avoid the Ryan Quigley special his entire rookie season, which is difficult to do as a rookie punter, I guess I would say. I think. But my point is I don't think he's going to let the nerves get to him. I think you're going to see that he's going to be the Jets punter for a long time. I think, his big issues are right now is out-kicking the coverage. He's been pretty good at coffin corner kicks. He may mess a few of those up, but I think the big thing is he's not going to have any ill-timed shanks. Or I guess any punt shank is an ill-timed shank. But I think you're going to just see him avoid that type of punt that has plagued the Jets at least once a year. It seems like every year since I've been a fan. Lastly, an undrafted free agent. Michael, I'll let you choose. I think we're probably going to end up going with the same guy, just he's the main undrafted free agent that's been making noise. But I'll let you go first. Undrafted free agent, what type of season, if any, maybe there is no undrafted free agent that makes the team, but will they make the team? What type of season will they have?
Well, I think I am going to go with a different guy than the one you're thinking of. I'm going to go with Javelin Guidry on defense, cornerback from Utah. He's Brian Poole, like we said earlier, has missed some time. And Guidry has been the number 2 slot corner for most of camp. He's been getting a lot of reps. Robbie Sabo's been at camp, and he's talked a lot about in his reporting, both on Twitter and the practice reports on JetX, about the time that Guidry has been getting. So I think he's going to make the team and potentially get some reps there in the slot at cornerback. So I know who you're gonna go with. He's been the most hyped undrafted free agent by far. So I'm going with another name. Maybe he doesn't make the team. Maybe I'm overrating him a little bit, but just mix it up. I will go with him. But I do think that Guidry will make the team and probably get some decent reps as a backup.
That's a sneaky good pick right there. And I commend you for not going with the obvious Lawrence Cager, which I will easily take the layup. I think it's pretty clear that just given the Jets' lack of depth at receiver, he should make the roster, barring that. Now, we still have to see about the knee injury. It could be more serious than we anticipate, and then he could miss some time or not make the roster. But assuming that his knee is okay and that he only misses a few days or a week of practice, I think that he will make the 53. And I'm not just going to go with him making the 53. I'm going to say he's going to start at least one game for the Jets in 2020. Similar to a guy like Vincent Smith, who had to start multiple games. He started way more than just one game. I could say that he could start 2 or 3 games, but I think Cager's a guy that at the very least will start at least one game for the Jets in 2020. We'll see if that's a good or bad thing. He has been impressing in training camp, especially in the red zone with those jump balls. So we'll see. But I think not only will he make the team, but I think he'll be forced to start some games due to injury. Michael, your thoughts on the Lawrence Cager prediction?
Yeah, he was a guy who, he's been really hyped from the start. When the Jets first signed him, fans were all over his highlights from college, and I was not big on him early, mostly because of injuries. He was extremely banged up throughout his career, and actually now in camp he did suffer an injury a couple of days ago. Forget what it was exactly.
Knee, yeah, it was a knee.
Yeah, and so injuries are a big question with him, so that's why I was kind of down on him. And also he wasn't very productive at all until he transferred from Miami to Georgia. But he's backed it up in camp. He's been probably the most hyped player on either side of the ball. We know that doesn't always translate, actually usually doesn't from what we've seen every single year. But it does mean that he will probably make the team considering how thin they are at wide receiver. And if they don't get healthier, whether that's with Mims, Vincent Smith is going to miss some time. But, he has a legitimate path to get some targets early on. So we'll see. Just exactly as you said, that could be a bad thing if we have an undrafted free agent getting big targets for Darnold in 2020, or it could be a good thing. He could be, a steal. We'll see what happens. But I think he will make the team. But we'll see, depending on the health of everyone else, how many opportunities he gets and then what he does with them.
All right, so we laid out what type of season we think every Jets rookie will have in 2020. A reminder, you can follow us at CYJPod on Twitter. You can follow myself at Ben W. Blessington. You can follow Michael at Michael_Nania. You can find this podcast wherever you listen to podcasts, iTunes, Spotify, in addition to JetsXFactor.com, the best place to go for Jets content. I know Michael just released the Jets X Factor offensive predictions. Everybody who's a part of the staff there, I imagine my predictions are better than everybody else's, but feel free to check that out.
I don't know about that.
Yeah, you were the only one.
Though we did have some similar ones, so yours were probably second best.
I would imagine, Michael, that my record is better than yours. Just remember who hated Jason Myers, and then turn face real quickly on that, because I remember.
That is true. I'm a major hypocrite with the special teamers.
Yeah, I know. And then you love Lack Edwards, and he was trash. Anyways, that'll wrap it up. Hope everybody's doing well. Michael, any last words?
I'm just excited for some real football. That's all. 15 days. Let's do it in Buffalo. I'm really excited to finally have a chance at revenge for that awful season opener last year. That was brutal, and I'm looking forward to having a chance to avenge that.
Yeah, it's pretty exciting that we're going to learn a lot about this team in 15 days, for better or for worse. I do think it'll be a close game, and I think the Jets are going to surprise a lot of people.
And it'll be interesting, too, because usually you use the preseason to practice recognizing players by their number, the gear they wear, their body type, things like that. But now I'm going to have to be watching the first game and figuring out how to do that. So I'm going to have no idea who anybody is probably until the fourth quarter, maybe even the second game. It's going to be tough.
Wow, these are the things that really matter at CYJ Pod. But everybody stay safe, stay healthy. Go Jets.
Goal line. Sam Darnold did it again. Jones has to take it away. Bradley McDougal. And he is in for a catch. Touchdown. That's over the middle in the air. Picked off. Brian Poole to the end zone. Touchdown. There goes Darnold. And Bell. He's doing it all for the Jets.